I don't know about you. I'm a little better at this now, but I've struggled with it for years. Today, 6 steps for starting a conversation with anyone, anywhere. This is Coaching for Leaders, episode 177.
Produced by Innovate Learning, maximizing human potential.
Greetings to you from Orange County, California. This is Coaching for Leaders, and I'm your host, Dave Stachowiak. This is a weekly show to help leaders improve their communication, strategy, coaching, productivity, and personal mastery. And today we're going to tackle a topic on communication that's so important for leaders in any role in any organization, and that is how to start a conversation with anybody, which is a really key skill to have. And a lot of people, me included, struggle with this on being able to walk into a room or to meet a client or to just be walking down the street and to run into someone and to strike up a conversation. And it's something I'm always looking to get better at. And that's why I'm really glad to introduce to you today Mark Sieverkropp. Mark and I just met recently, and he is an author, consultant, and speaker. He's the author of Project Success, which climbed to number 3 in the self-help category in the Amazon Kindle store. He's passionate about connecting with others, finding ways to add value to help them and to help other people do the same. And Mark and I got connected just in the last couple of weeks because we both appeared in an article that was published on Forbes on the 25 professional networking experts to watch in 2015. And when that article came out, Mark and I were both on the list, and Mark reached out to me and said, "Hey, it's nice to know you, and I'd love to chat sometime." And we had a great chat, and I found out about his book, and I knew it was a great fit for our audience. Mark, I'm so glad to welcome you to the show.
Thanks, Dave. It's good to be here. I read that and I sent that message to you, and you have one of those names that I had heard around, and I had seen you on Twitter and whatnot, and I think I was actually following you before that, but had never actually talked to you. So I reached out and said congratulations, like you said, and you suggested, you tell me that I know how to start conversations with people, but you suggested we should talk, and so we did so, and here we are.
Well, it's interesting that you bring that up, because that's something that I'm focusing on doing better this year, which is actually taking the next step, because it's so like me to have a conversation on a social network or on Twitter with someone that I really should meet, like you, who's very influential in the work you're doing, and to just say, "Okay, thanks, good to know you," and just leave it at that. And I remember seeing your tweet. I made a very conscious effort. I'm like, okay, he's a person you should really know. How about you have a conversation with him and just see where things go? And but isn't that something that I think a lot of us struggle with, Mark? Is like just we see people around. Maybe if we even walked by this person for 7 years in the office building, and we sort of know that they're there. We know their name, maybe, but we never really took the time to actually start a conversation with them.
Yeah, I think that's, it's, as I'm talking to people about meeting people and networking and whatnot, one of the things that I always tell people is if you'll just take one extra step beyond what everybody else normally does, you're going to go way farther in developing relationships. So exactly what you were talking about, rather than just saying, "Hey, thanks." And I had a lot of people on that list that said just that. It's like, "Hey, thanks. You too," and that was it. But taking that extra step is really all it takes. You don't have to do a lot more than everybody else. It's that slight edge principle that you hear talked about. You just do a little bit more, and it makes you stand out, and it makes you develop those relationships. Because you're right, none of us are, I guess I won't say none of us, but very few of us just go out of our way to talk to every single person we see. But if we'll take a couple steps every once in a while, it's amazing the people you meet and the connections you make and the opportunities that you find because you take that opportunity to go a little bit farther and say hi to somebody or set up a phone call or ask them how their day was going, whatever it is. That really is all you have to do to really develop those relationships.
Well, I resonate with that a lot. My coaching guide last week featured the quote from Ralph Waldo Emerson that said, "A hero is no braver than an ordinary man, but he's brave 5 minutes longer." And that really resonates with me on what you just said, because it's not that the people out there who are great networkers and great influencers and connectors are that much more brilliant or smarter or skilled than anyone else. It's just that they're willing a lot of the times to just take that next step, to ask the next question, to engage in the conversation that a lot of other people would just pass by. And their willingness to do that is key to building relationships. And you're an example of someone who's done that really successfully.
Yeah, absolutely. People call me every once in a while. I'll hear somebody say, "Well, you're just really naturally good at talking to people, or you're naturally good at building relationships," and I'm complimented by that. And anybody that says that, I appreciate that. But I started thinking about it, and it's like, Dave, you and I and everybody else in the world, we all started with the same amount of connections when we came into the world. Nobody was born with 1,000 Facebook friends.
Right.
We all developed relationships the same way. So it's a learned skill. And I think the key with people is they hear about networking, or they hear about, connecting with somebody they don't know, and they psych themselves out. And really, our entire lives has been, based around developing relationships with people and getting to know people. And so, you mentioned the book, and, what I tried to do with that is just say, okay, what are the principles that make it easier? I'm not always, as I walk into a room, I'm not always the person that is talking to every single person. And I'm not always the one that's way, the super outgoing person. But when I apply these principles that I talk about, it makes it easier. And then it's like what Ralph Waldo Emerson was saying, you just have to do it a little bit longer, and you just have to push it a little bit farther than perhaps you're comfortable with at the time. And then that's where you get the reward of meeting somebody that really is a great connection that you can help, but also that can help you and open up doors and opportunities that perhaps you wouldn't have otherwise.
For sure. Well, and I'm glad you mentioned this, because this highlights one of the books you've put together, which is called How to Start a Conversation with Anyone, Anywhere. I'm sorry, I got that wrong. It's actually Start a Conversation with Anyone, Anywhere. And you highlight 6 principles, steps really, to go through that process of how to start a conversation. So I thought it'd be really helpful for the audience for us to just walk through kind of the 1 through 6. What exactly should we do? And then, maybe look at some examples and some thinking around each one of those. Does that sound good to you?
Sure. Yeah, let's do it.
So let's tackle the first one here. So you say first impressions last the longest. Why is the first impression so important, and what are the kinds of things we should be thinking about to make a good first impression?
Well, first off, I'll say I remember hearing on your podcast a while back, you and our friend John Corcoran talking about what to do if you don't make a good first impression.
Yeah.
So if you fail at this, go back and listen to that one. But
good point.
The first impression does last the longest, and I'm not sure. I'm sure there's some science that I could find and quote why, but that's just been my experience. You always, whatever that first impression is, that's what you think of when you think of that person from there until 10 years from then, unless they change that perception after that. It's really, as humans, and I don't know if it's a fight or flight thing from back in the days when, we had to, chase down our own food and everything, but we judge people very quickly. And I don't mean judge in a bad way. We just size people up. And we when we're in a situation where we're meeting people, it's a matter of, is this somebody that I would enjoy talking to? Is this somebody that could benefit me if I know them? Is this somebody that we would get along? And those are all things that we instantly think of when somebody's walking up to us or when somebody starts talking to us. And so you really have to be intentional about how you come across, because, I know that there's things that I do that come across the wrong way, and nothing real bad, but just, sometimes I'm a little, I don't want to say ADD. I'm not ADD, but I'm very, shiny object. And I think it's kind of an entrepreneur thing. So I'll be looking around a lot. And so that's something I have to consciously say, okay, I need to focus on this person. I need to talk to them. I need to, not be looking at my watch or checking my phone. It's not that I don't care about that person. That's just something that I kind of naturally do. And so I have to be careful that doesn't happen. So none of this is groundbreaking stuff. I mean, make sure you're smiling. Make sure that you look like you're having a good time. If you don't look like you're having a good time, nobody's going to want to talk to you because, well, they probably want to have a good time. They want to enjoy the conversation. So you have to smile. You have to make eye contact. You have to do all those things that we talk about all the time and we hear. Another one that isn't always talked about is dressing appropriately. We judge people very quickly on how they're dressed. And so understanding how everyone's going to be dressed at an event or where you're going, a gathering, and dressing appropriately for that is a big deal, because people will judge who you are based on how you're dressed. And sometimes that's worse. Sometimes that's better. I mean, if you're showing up at a place where everybody's wearing shorts and a t-shirt and you're wearing, a 3-piece suit, they might judge you as somebody that's not going to have as much fun and might not want to talk to you. Or they might judge you as somebody that's way out of their league as far as talking to, and they won't want to talk to you. So, I always try to dress, either at or one step above what everybody else is going to be. And that allows you to be in that same ballpark, but also present yourself in a way that allows people to want to talk to you and want to get to know you more.
That's great advice. And it's the same advice I use myself and for others, and particularly going to see clients, is trying to dress at or a step above the people that we're going to see or wherever we're going for a meeting or an event. And that really works well. It's always easier to dress down a little bit when you get there, if need be, than it is to try to dress up if you're underdressed. And you mentioned these are fundamental things. It's so important though, like the handshake. I remember I still have echoes of my dad when I was a kid of give people a firm handshake, and I took it to heart so strongly that I actually injured once a couple of times. I had people like, that's really firm, your handshake there. But people do notice, and you notice when someone just kind of like doesn't give you a firm handshake and doesn't.
It's the worst thing in the world to shake somebody's hand when it's not firm.
It's awkward. It's awkward. And I know not in every culture this is the way to do it, by the way, but here in the States, that is certainly a cultural dynamic. And it's one of those things that if you do it well, you get to continue the conversation, and it's not like you get anything by giving a firm handshake, but you don't put up obstacles that are awkward if you're not smiling, giving that firm handshake, dressed appropriately. It kind of gives you permission, if you would, to be able to engage to go to the next level.
Yeah, and with the handshake, when I was serving a mission for my church, or my mission president or the leader of the mission I was in, he used to always tell us, he'd say match the pressure and then just a little bit more. And that's always worked pretty well for me, because I've had the same thing. I've shaken somebody's hand too hard, and the hardest one for me, I have a friend that he's a lineman, big burly guy, and I shake his hand, but he has arthritis and carpal tunnel, and so I think that is this big burly guy, so I shake really hard. And so you have to be really careful with that. Like, like you were saying with your experiences, if you match the pressure that they have, it's a good way to start. And I love what you said there, Dave, about how this is just keeping barriers, it's keeping from having barriers to a conversation. Is all of these things, really, that's what they are, is just making it easier to have the conversation, because you're not, putting up all these red flags, and people aren't, hesitant because you do look like you're having fun. You do have a good handshake. You are making eye contact. You're dressed like they would expect someone to be dressed that they want to talk to. And really, this first one is all about that. You're exactly right, that you're just keeping from adding barriers to getting to know this person.
And if you do that well, you can go on to number 2, which is to practice the type of listening that makes a difference. And I'm going to quote you, quoting Dale Carnegie here. I'm so glad you mentioned Dale Carnegie. Dale Carnegie said, "If you aspire to be a good conversationalist, be an attentive listener. To be interesting, be interested. Ask questions that the other persons will enjoy answering. Encourage them to talk about themselves and their accomplishments." Such good advice, even almost 100 years after he wrote it,
it's been, I've read Dale's book several times, but I remember the first time reading and reading the story about the guy that talked to the little boy with the sailboats.
Yeah.
And, just that really stuck with me. It's like, no, I couldn't care less about sailboats. He didn't care, but that's what he was interested in. It's, I hope you don't mind me sharing this story, but when you and I talked for the first time last week, you kept asking me questions and doing a really good job at this. And finally I had to say, okay, hold on, Dale Carnegie. I need to ask you some questions too. So it is funny, when you get two people that are really good at that or get that idea and get that concept, it does make it challenging because both people want to ask about the other person. And the thing I found with this is people can tell when you're genuine. You might not care anything about sailboats, but you dang well better care about whether, that person cares about sailboats. You better care about whether, whatever they're talking about. And that comes through. And it's very obvious that people care about what you're talking about. And if you don't care and you're just asking questions, it comes through very quickly and you can see straight through that.
I'm not remembering who said it, but there's a famous quote that every person is my superior in some way. And one thing that I found that's helpful is that the recognition that if I spend enough time listening and asking the right question, that this person, whoever they are and whatever age they are, has something to teach me today and has something that I can learn from them or I can appreciate or I can love about them, even if it's something that I'm not necessarily interested in. And more often than not, even if it's something that doesn't seem apparently interesting to me, inevitably I'll have another conversation down the road with someone else. And I'll be like, oh, it's really interesting. You're both interested in the same thing, or you can make a connection with someone because you took the time to listen and understand something they were passionate about. And then you run across someone else 3 months later who's got the same passion. And so it really does help to really look at it, like Dale Carnegie said too, from the other person's point of view, doesn't it?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And, one of the things too, as you're looking at it from their point of view, is I catch myself. And this is one of the things that I'm horrible at. And I think a lot of people struggle with this. And Stephen Covey talks about not preparing your answer while somebody else is talking. And that's one of the hardest things with listening, I think, because somebody says something, and Dave, maybe you said something a minute ago and I'm like, oh, that's really interesting. And I have something that I'd like to say about that. But if you're not paying attention all the way through the end of what they're saying, it's easy to miss something that's really important. And that's the type of listening we're talking about. In the book, I make the analogy of, if you're listening to hear if you won the Publishers Clearinghouse sweepstakes, that's a different kind of listening than if you're just listening, and doing something else and not really paying attention to what somebody's saying. That's the type of listening we're talking about. It's the type of listening where, like you said, you want to understand what their perspective is. You want to understand what their viewpoint is and not just be prepared for the next thing that you can say.
Well, that hits a chord for me because that's probably the area I've struggled most with in interviewing people on this show over the last 3 to 4 years, because I've definitely made the shift in the beginning. And I know you've run a podcast too, Mark. In the beginning, I spent a lot of time prepping interviews and thinking about writing out all my questions I was going to ask. And I've learned over time that the best thing I can do is actually not to prep that much. I mean, certainly be knowledgeable about people and their work and, having reviewed their material, but to not necessarily have a list of questions, but to really just listen well and to be curious and to ask about their work and what they did. And I find that when I do that, the comments that come back from our community are much more like, wow, great conversation, or that was really interesting to listen to, because it didn't seem just like a very disjointed conversation where one person's just waiting to ask the next question that was already scripted,
Yeah, I completely know it. When we, I was co-host of the Happen to Your Career podcast for a while, and that's one of the things we talked about when we started the show, because we hated listening to podcasts where somebody would be like, and then I had this epiphany and this happened in my life and it totally changed my life. And then the next question right after that has nothing to do with what they just said. Right. It's like, wait, hold on. I want to know how it changed your life.
Like, wait, that was the big thing.
wait, that's the whole podcast. That's what it should be about, and that's what we do in our day-to-day lives too. We don't always catch those subtle things that are important. And along those lines, before we move on to 3, can I make one more point about this?
Yeah, absolutely.
Another thing that's really hard is think about, and I'll tell your audience, think about your last day and think about how many times you've been interrupted when you're talking. And I guarantee you it's been a ton. And this has been really hard for me too, is not interrupting people because you have something you want to say. Yeah. Again, when I was on my mission, I had a companion and we were walking around one day and we were talking, and I thought we were having a great conversation, talking about all sorts of things, really interesting. I was really engaged. And then all of a sudden I realized that he hadn't said anything for like 5 minutes. And so I stopped. I'm like, why aren't you saying anything? And he just looks at me, and I will never forget this comment as long as I live. He looked at me and he goes, well, every time I try to say something, you interrupt me. So I just figured I'd just be quiet. And I felt about this big. Yeah. I felt inches tall, and it just hit me that I kept interrupting. And he just finally, he taught me a lesson that I will never forget. And I'd encourage your audience to think about that. Think about the next day and watch how many times you're having a conversation with a coworker or your boss or your spouse or your kids, and either they interrupt you or you interrupt them. And it completely kills a conversation if it happens too much. We've all had a conversation with that person that always has to jump in, always has to say something, and you can tell they're not even listening to what you say. They heard one part of it, but then they jumped in and said their part. And if you do that, people aren't going to want to talk to you. And if people don't want to talk to you because you don't listen to them, it's really hard to develop a relationship with them.
Oh, for sure. And what a great gift he gave you, because most people would never say something like that. They would just, nod and, keep listening. So great lesson. I love it.
That was 10 years ago. I haven't forgot it.
Good for you.
I felt horrible.
Yeah. Well, and I think any of us would. And the difference is you did something about it. And I think that's the key is, what can you do when you have a epiphany moment like that, or you realize you've blown something. I know I have, certainly in interviews before on this show, of not doing a good job of being curious, is you learn from it and you say, okay, how can I get better in the next interaction or the next person that I meet? So yeah. All right, well, let's look at number 3 here. Understand who people are by how they act. Tell me about that.
So I don't mean to be like a creepy stalker person, but when you're getting ready to meet somebody, or you're just meeting somebody and maybe there's a group of 4 or 5 of you, I really try to watch how they interact, how they communicate, because I found that I'm typically pretty animated and pretty, not super loud, but I'm more loud, and I joke around and I laugh and do all those things. But I've noticed if I do that with somebody that's reserved and quiet, they get really uncomfortable in the conversation. So if you're in a room and you want to meet somebody, I'll watch them and I'll see how they're interacting with other people. Are they more animated? Are they more loud? Do they like joking around? Do they are they a person that likes their personal space? Are they standing a little farther back from the person, or are they standing a little closer and doing one of the kind of push the shoulder, laughing, joking kind of things? And if you'll do that and you'll observe and notice the way they communicate, then you can match that. And if you can match that, it's more likely that they will, 1, enjoy the conversation, but 2, you'll be able to get across, your intentions, whether that's, how you want to come across, because we all, whether it's right or not, and, we all try to interact with people the way they interact, but we all like to interact the way we interact. And so if you want to be a good conversationalist, noticing how somebody interacts and how they talk and how they present themselves, and then matching that, makes it much easier to carry on a conversation and for them to enjoy the conversation, which really is the goal when you're first meeting somebody, is just to have them enjoy talking to you enough that they'll want to talk to you again in the future.
I remember a number of years ago having one of our senior colleagues at Dale Carnegie took a person who was fairly new to the organization out for a couple of meetings, and he was observing. And they came back, and the person who was new said, you really handled those 2 interactions really differently. And it turned out that the meetings were very similar as far as what they were talking about, but the personality of the other party, the client, was very different. And so my colleague said, well, in one meeting, I noticed the person was really loud and extroverted and enthusiastic. So I was more loud and extroverted and enthusiastic in my responses. In the other meeting, the person was really quiet and didn't say very much and spoke very softly. And so he changed his tone. And it's one of those things that a lot of times he didn't even think about, because he's so good at doing it and so masterful of having learned that. So still being true to ourselves, of course, but being willing to flex our style a little bit so we can meet people where they want to be met and communicated with.
Right. And I think that's a great point. In saying that, I'm not saying don't be yourself. But if I'm talking to somebody that's quieter, I might tone myself down a little bit. I'm still probably going to be more animated than they are.
Yeah, sure.
But if you tone it down a little bit, they'll notice that, and odds are they've probably seen you, and they've seen it, if it's like me and you're a little louder and you like to be the center of attention a little bit more, they've seen that. And so they'll notice when you tone it down a little bit, and they'll be more comfortable. And that's really, like we said, that's the point of it. And, the other thing is just kind of watching their body language. And, you can tell very quickly. And I was listening to your podcast, and you were talking about, the whole looking at the watch thing. And, noticing those types of things. And I loved, what you and your wife said about that is just saying, hey, are we still okay? Or do we need to, do you need to go do something else or talk to somebody? And that makes it really simple. And that's the exact thing that, observing is huge with, because you can notice whether somebody's looking around a little bit more, they're starting to fidget more, they're looking at their watch. And you don't want to be a bother. And we'll get into this in one of the later techniques and principles of it. But you want to notice those things and gauge whether they're engaged in the conversation. And that happens by observing and seeing how they're responding to what you're saying and how they're saying what they're saying. And that's huge in building a relationship.
We've hit on number 4 a little bit, but it bears repeating, which is people like others who share their same interests. And that is so true, isn't it? That,
oh, yeah.
You find someone and you find something. I know I get so excited when I meet someone and we find something in common, because then it's easy to talk. Because if you find, like, for example, you're both fans of the Chicago Cubs, or you both are learning how to play guitar or something like that, then all of a sudden you can talk for hours about that.
Oh, yeah. And I think even now with our culture and, with social media and with us being able to pay attention to what we like more often, it's not just three channels on TV anymore. You get to pick what you want to watch. You get to pick what you want to listen to.
Yeah.
We're even more gauged that way, to where we want to find the people that like what we like and do what we do and have those common interests. So, really great places to start are family and career and their interests. Those types of things are pretty easy to have a conversation and say, hey, are you married? Do you have kids? Oh, my kids are this age. And I find that's one of the best ways, because, I'm passionate about my family and I love my kids. And so it's really easy to have that conversation. Dave, you and I did that when we talked last week. Once we started to talk about our kids and what they were like at certain ages and those types of things, it seemed like, 10 minutes went by all of a sudden. And it was easy to have that conversation because that's something we like talking about. And I think one of the things that people get hung up on is, if it's a business or a professional situation, they think all they need to do is talk about business.
Yeah, we all show up as people in the workplace. I mean, after all, a corporation is just a collection of people working toward a common goal, and we're still people. We have our interests. We have things that we are, passionate about. And of course, being sensitive to, asking questions that aren't, putting people getting too personal or putting people on the defensive. But a lot of times we can ask, very, very general things like, what keeps you busy outside the workplace, or what interests do you have? And those are the kinds of things that can often open up the doors to really finding some things that people are really excited about in their lives and then get a chance to talk about.
Yeah. And, that's one of the things that, maybe not when the first time you meet somebody, but there's so many ways to do that now. You're friends with somebody on Facebook or LinkedIn, and you can see some of the things they like that are beyond work.
Yeah.
And there's an app I use on my phone called Refresh that makes that really easy. And it'll help you find that common ground quicker. But when you're first meeting somebody, it's just a matter of asking the question. I would go into a conversation, have 3 or 4 questions that, if it comes up, that's what you would want to ask. So maybe that's, hey, do you have any family in the area? Or what brought you to this area? Or how long have you worked at this company? Or whatever it is. Pick 2 or 3 questions that you're comfortable with and use them to find that common ground. And once you hit on something that they like to talk about, which is pretty easy to tell, they'll start getting more excited and they'll smile and they'll keep talking about it. Go with that and just keep going. And that makes it really easy to carry on a conversation with someone.
And then we come to the point where you have to figure out when to end the conversation. So fifth point you mentioned is don't hold your listener hostage. And I think part of the strategy here too, because I know one of the things we're going to talk about later is the importance of follow-up, is how do you end gracefully and at the same time build that follow-up from that first conversation into the next conversation?
Yes, these are so huge. And so many times when I hear people talk about meeting people and networking events, nobody ever talks about how do you end the conversation? Because it can get really awkward if it goes on too long and you're just both kind of standing there staring at each other.
Yeah. I've totally been at events where that's happened.
Oh yeah, all the time. Yeah. And so finding and determining how to end that conversation is a big part of meeting somebody, because you want that first impression to be good. And that first impression will probably carry through this entire first conversation, which typically, if you're in an event or something, isn't more than 5 or 10 minutes, maybe tops. So one of the things, as we were already talking about observing, is you just start watching their body language. I mean, are they starting to, look at other people? Are they looking at their watch and those types of things? At that point, you just wrap up the conversation and, you just tell them, hey, I had a great time talking to you. I'm sure there's lots of people that you need to talk to as well, or you'd like to talk to. And then we'll go into the next principle a little bit here, but then you find a way to follow up, and if you don't find a way to follow up, you've just wasted the last 10 minutes of your time. And you can go back and find how to contact them, but it's easier to say, hey, do you have a card? Can I get a hold of you next week and we'll continue this conversation? And if you've been listening to what's important to them, it makes it really easy because you can say, hey, do you have a card? I'd like to contact you next week. I'd like to hear more about blah, whatever they said. And that makes it easy for you to exit the conversation, leave on a good note because you're telling them that you really enjoyed the conversation, and not be a bother, not hold them hostage because, like you said, Dave, I've been in those situations too where everybody's just kind of like, well, I guess I'll go over here now, and you don't want it to be awkward because, like we've talked about over and over again, developing relationships isn't done in this first conversation. It's done with follow-up after follow-up after follow-up and continuing to build that relationship. So you want them to be okay with you contacting them again, that you don't want them to be like, oh, that was really awkward when I talked to Mark last time. I don't really know if I want to answer his email. You want it to be a good experience, and that happens by knowing when to end the conversation and planning how you will end that conversation. And you'll have to do that beforehand and figure out how that works for you. But by planning it ahead of time, it makes it a lot less awkward and a lot more graceful and more likely that you'll be able to continue that relationship.
Well, and that takes us right into the final point here and the follow-up piece that I know is key, which is remembering the conversation so you can grow the relationship and then doing some kind of follow-up. And I'm curious what you use, Mark, because you've thought this through a lot and you do a lot of this. Are there tools or resources or just good practices that you find that have worked for you as far as being able to remember some of those details, and then how you either keep track of that or database it or just use your memory, or what is it that you find that works?
Well, for me, I will tell you, I'm not as good at it as I should be. My wife will famously say that I'm horrible about remembering things. I'm a very, I guess, depending on which, personality test you want to take, but I'm very extroverted and I don't do details. So I try really hard afterwards to, either make a note in my phone or jot down on a piece of paper, 2 or 3 things about the person. And there's different apps that allow you to do that. Obviously, like Evernote would be good. Refresh that I talked about has a note section for people. And so you can use those types of things. The other thing that I found to be really useful in that is if I tell somebody I'm going to email them next week, there's several different, especially for Gmail, there's several different, extensions you can use that allow you to schedule your emails out. And so sometimes what I'll do is I'll say, hey, I'm going to email you next Tuesday. I'll sit down right after the event and I will write that email right then and schedule it for next Tuesday. So cool. I'm not trying to remember something from, Thursday through Tuesday. I remember it right then and I schedule it to send next Tuesday. That way I don't have to worry about trying to remember to follow up for 1, but for 2, it allows me to remember those details so I can say, hey, it was great talking to you about, whatever you talked about. I'd like to learn more about it. I thought about this, or whatever you use in the follow-up. But if you do it right away, it's easier. And so that's one of the things that I try to remember to do is just do it right away. That way I don't forget and Smart. I don't forget to follow up and I don't forget those details that are important. Yeah,
that's smart. That's really smart. And you mentioned a couple of different apps, Evernote and Refresh. I've not heard of Refresh. Is that something that integrates with Gmail, or is that something like a standalone?
It is a standalone. It's an app. I know it's for iOS. I don't know if they have it for Android yet, but they do have a web app as well. And I think it's refresh.io. I think is the website. But it's fantastic. And what Refresh does is it takes all of your different social media profiles and it syncs them together. So it'll take Facebook and LinkedIn and Twitter and all of those, and it'll create a dossier, people in the government use when they're meeting somebody. And that's exactly why it was created. The creator of it said that he had seen this done when he was working with a company that was working with the government. And so he's created this thing where it'll say, okay, you have these people in common. This person likes this sports team. This is their record right now. And it's amazing the way that it allows you to find common ground very quickly just by grabbing your information from all these different areas and putting them into one app. So I'd highly recommend taking a look at it if you haven't. It's really neat, and it's been really useful for me to find that type of information and be able to build on that common ground. And like I said, you can use it to put notes in so you remember things from times before when you've talked to people, and it's all right there. But really the key is finding what works best for you. Some people will write it down. Some people will like the idea of writing the email and then scheduling it. Some people that are very detail oriented will have a spreadsheet that they use and it record all these things. And I think the key with all of those things is really finding out what works for you. Get some ideas, but then don't be worried if it doesn't work for you to do what I do, or it doesn't work for you to do what, you do, Dave. Find what works for you and with your personality, but, make sure that you remember those things, because it really is the little things in a relationship that make a big difference. It's making note of, what their kids' names are, making note of what their spouse's name is, making note of all of those types of things that everybody else forgets. And that's where you stand out, and that's where you make a difference. And that goes along with, in Dale Carnegie's book where he talks about remembering people's names. It's that same thing.
For sure.
People can tell when you care, and when you care, you remember things. So it's finding the best way to do that, and then making sure that you do that, and then you follow up with it.
Yeah, and I think you hit the nail on the head, which is the key is not necessarily the system you're using, but just having something you're dedicated to do that you'll use and will actually record things and get you to follow up on it. And whether that's pen and paper or an app or a spreadsheet, it's key to do that when you are spending time interacting with people, so that you follow through on the commitments you've made and you continue relationships you've built. Otherwise, why bother doing it in the first place,
Exactly.
Yeah.
A lot of wasted time otherwise.
For sure. How do, so the book is Start a Conversation with Anyone, Anywhere. How can people get access to it?
So the book is available on Amazon if you look for it there. But, Dave, for your audience, I would love to have them just head on over to my website, and I will send them a copy because I think the stuff's so important that I would love to share a copy with them. So they can, I guess we can tell you the link now, or we can just put it in the show notes, whichever you prefer.
Yeah. Well, why don't we do this? Why don't I create a link at coachingforleaders.com/start a conversation. And what we'll do is we'll set that up before the show airs and make sure that goes right to your book so people can grab it. And before I let you go, and by the way, that'll be in the show notes and the weekly leadership guide that everyone gets on Wednesdays. So if you're getting that, you'll get that in your email box automatically. Before I let you go, Mark, you guys, you and John Corcoran, who's a friend of the show and has been on several times, and we mentioned actually during our conversation, and Matt, and I'm blanking on Matt's last name. I haven't met him before. Mick Williams, that's it. Yeah. I need to meet him too. You guys are putting together a really powerful event in February that's going to help people to get better at this skill, and it's available online. And I wanted to see if you could take a moment to tell people about that as well.
Oh, absolutely. It's called Networking with Purpose Live. And like you said, it's John, who your audience is very familiar with, and we all know is an amazing networker, an amazing connector, and has used that to build a great business and to have some great experiences in his life. But also Matt McWilliams, who is one of the best connectors and networkers I've ever met. He actually tells a story about how he went from being fired from his job. He got home, sent an email out to his network and said, "Hey, just wanted you to hear from me. I got, I don't know what he said. I don't think he said I got fired, but I'm looking for new opportunities or something." He ended up getting so many offers from his network that he ended up being a consultant. And that's what he does today. He said, "I had so many offers that I just took them all."
Wow.
And so he's fantastic. And he's told me that he can trace back, all of his clients that he has now to his network, and about $500,000 worth of sales. Because of his network. So the three of us have teamed up together, and we're going to be doing this live event. It's online, so everybody can get to it. And we're going to be going through a lot of those things. Some of the things that you and I talked about today, we're going to be talking about how to use your network and build a network to, advance in your career or get a new job if you want. We're going to talk about, face-to-face networking. We're going to talk about using social media. So really, we're taking our playbooks and we're opening them up to everybody. And we're just saying, hey, here it is. And here's what we do and here's what works, and we're going to do that. We're going to have question and answer at the end. So anybody that has questions, we can address those as well. And we're just super excited about it. And one of the side benefits is, we're going to get to connect with all these people. And that's what all three of us love doing is starting conversations and getting to know people and finding ways that we can add value. And we've found with the knowledge that the three of us have developed in this area that it's a big area of value, and it's a big area that's necessary for people that I think a lot of people shy away from because they hear networking and they start thinking about a chamber mixer with a whole bunch of business cards.
Yeah.
And then that's not the way it is anymore. And that's not the way we build our network. And that's not the way we meet people. And so we want to help people get over that fear and over those mental roadblocks they place in front of them, and be able to use these tools and these strategies to get the things that they want in their life, achieve the goals that they have. You have a link for that, so I'm assuming that'll be in the show notes.
And my audience is, I don't typically feature other courses or products that people are offering, but once in a while I make an exception, because when it's someone who's doing something truly remarkable and really valuable to people, I like to get that in front of people, because I think that's really important. And we did that with Michael Hyatt's course here back over the turn of the year to get people started on their goal setting. And because of the people involved here, you, Matt, and John Corcoran, I know this is going to be a fabulous event. So if that sounds interesting to you, what Mark has just mentioned, I'd encourage you to check out. We have set up an affiliate relationship with the event. So if you are interested in doing that and supporting the Coaching for Leaders community, go check it out at coachingforleaders.com/networking with purpose, which is the title of the event. So again, that's coachingforleaders.com/networking with purpose. I know you'll get a lot from that experience, and the link, of course, will be in the show notes and the weekly leadership guide as well. Mark, perfect. I am really thrilled that you took the time to be here today. And by the way, we should say when that's going to be too, by the way.
February 10th.
February 10th, 2015, and yes. It's live, right? So what time is it?
3 p.m. Eastern, so noon Pacific.
Okay, so February 10th, 2015. If you're listening to this after that, it obviously isn't available, but if you're listening before that, check it out again, coachingforleaders.com/networking with purpose. Mark, I'm really grateful for your wisdom and expertise, and thanks for making the book available to our audience too. I know people will really appreciate that.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me on, Dave.
If you missed any of those links for the book or for the Networking with Purpose event, just check them out at coachingforleaders.com/177. Of course, those of you who get the weekly leadership guide, you'll find those at the bottom of the guide. I've actually moved the podcast notes to the bottom starting this past week, so find them there with all the links. And as always, I welcome your comments, questions, and feedback too. In particular, if you have a question for the upcoming Q&A show, which is next week, I hope you'll submit it. The next Q&A show is going to be next week, episode 178. Our topic is accountability. Submit questions now at coachingforleaders.com/feedback, and I will definitely consider them for the show. And regardless if you have a question, I hope that you'll join the weekly leadership guide. I am publishing that to your inbox every Wednesday, and that includes my thoughts and recommendations on the best articles, podcasts, videos, and books to support your development between shows. It also has a brief overview of the link to the full weekly show notes, as I mentioned. So if you're like me and you listen to podcasts on the road and on the go or on the way to the supermarket, this will give you an easy way to follow up later with the links mentioned in every show. And I wanted to especially thank the people this week who have subscribed to the leadership guide, and that is Quay Kestar, David Deaton, Tracy Chalmers, Vicky Bastian, Russ Vilt, Ricardo Montano Ozana, hope I said that right, Ricardo, Fiona Adamson, sorry Fiona, Alessandro Beraldi, Dina Simino, Kali Kalek, Casey Comstock, Adrian Webush, Paul Ward, Ulana Dabbs, Michael Chamberlain, Mike Hare, David Walker, and Mark Sieverkropp. That name sounds familiar. I feel like I've heard of Mark somewhere before. And thank you so much for all of you who have joined. And a reminder as a bonus, when you join the weekly leadership guide, you'll get access right away to download my guide on the 10 leadership books that will help you get better results from others. It's an 11-page reader's guide and a 9-minute video with all the top recommendations I have, plus insight on the 2 books I rely on weekly. All of that available at coachingforleaders.com/subscribe. So check that out. And a big shout out this week to Kenny Wheeler out in the UK. Hey, Kenny, man, thank you so much for the great shout out on iTunes about the show. I so appreciate it. And I also really appreciate your personal message to me too, Kenny. Thank you. If this show's been helpful to you, 2 ways you can help. One is to let someone else know about it, particularly today's show. Who doesn't need to know how to start a conversation with anyone or everyone? Why not? Pass this show along to someone that might benefit from that. And the other way you can help is, if the show's been helpful to you, is to leave a review on iTunes or Stitcher like Kenny did. Just go to coachingforleaders.com/iTunes or coachingforleaders.com/Stitcher. That's the way to do it. And thanks in advance if you decide to do that. I hope you have a fabulous week and go out and meet someone new this week. Take care.